So yeah, I train teachers who teach English and also content and language integrated learning. But I'm also really fortunate in my work that I can go into primary and lower secondary schools to deliver classroom projects. So I thought I'd start today with a little story. So earlier this year, before the summer holidays, I was finishing a project with a grade 6 group, so the first year of middle school in Italy. And they'd been making digital stories with tips on how to save energy. And it got to the point where they were doing their presentations of their digital stories. And there was one boy in one group who has ADHD, and he was kind of visibly fizzing, like this bottle I've got here. He was kind of fizzing with energy and, maybe anxiety and excitement. But it was clearly a really, really big moment for him. And they did their presentation and they did a really great job. We listened to their recorded voices in the digital book, and they asked, answered some questions. And at the end of the presentation, the teacher kind of leant over to me and said, he never usually speaks English. Like he doesn't speak English in class. He was really one of those kids when you say, "Do you speak English?" Like, no, 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 English is not for me. So it really stayed with me, and kind of inspired me to do this talk today. Why to speak as part of this project? What helped him to come out of himself? And maybe it was the digital story format. That's maybe another talk. It's a really great format for encouraging speaking and participation. But also, I think the journey, the guided support, the working with a group of peers towards a final outcome, which he was motivated to complete, helped him to come out of his shell and to speak and to participate. So I'm just going to flip to the next slide and see if I can find the chat because I need the chat for this. Okay, so I just want you to think back and you can share your thoughts in the chat if you like, or you can keep it private. But think back to when you were at primary school, maybe upper primary school or secondary school, to a positive learning experience that you remember, something that maybe inspired you or stayed with you. I wonder if something comes to mind. What's kind of the first thing to pop into your head? I'm willing to bet it was something maybe novel, putting on a school-wide play. Yeah, that's a great one, Alison. Outings. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I was going to say, I'm willing to bet it was something maybe novel, something you were an active agent in, you had some kind of responsibility, maybe a project where you had a particular role, or you made something, you did something you hadn't done before, something where you felt really relaxed and happy, you were working with your friends, with your peers, or maybe an experience outside the classroom as well. Someone said outings, sharing time with mates, doing a biography and performing it in character. Yeah, brilliant. So these kind of novel experiences can really leave an impression on us. And in the introduction, we heard that I come from a museum learning background. My earlier work was all about learning outside the classroom. So getting schools to come to the museum or maybe to borrow objects to use in their school. And that experience taught me so much about the power of novelty, doing something different from everyday class routines. But also, immersion, yeah, real world connection. So being involved in something that you're really connected to and experiencing. And journeys as well, creating or doing something meaningful together. And I think, what projects can do in the English language classroom is bring those things into the classroom. So, I mean, yeah, you can go to museums and things, fantastic, but you can do projects in the classroom which bring those three things, novelty, immersion, and journeys, with authentic, hands-on learning by doing, which maybe, shifts perspective or creates positive learning spaces that can really energize students. When I'm invited into schools as an external teacher to collaborate on projects, we usually have about 10 to 15 hours together, so not a huge amount of time, but we really try to make those hours count and create this kind of journey where learners are using English actively and purposefully. We've heard about that already today, like in Jane's talk earlier. We're actively using English in a purposeful way. Um, there's lots of time for interaction and collaboration and speaking and using the language, because that's what really, helps them to develop their language skills, but also a whole lot of other skills as well. So what's the plan for today? Today, we're going to be looking at the purpose of projects. So we've started to think about that already. I'm going to share with you some examples from lower secondary schools, so middle schools in Italy, which could be adapted for primary as well, some of them. Excuse me. I've got a bit of a frog in my throat today. And I'm going to share with you a little bit of teacher and student feedback, just some informal feedback, and then a kind of mini framework of how to make projects really POW, how to give projects that POW factor. Okay. So what do we mean by a project? I think this is quite a nice definition, so I'll read it in case anyone's not able to see the screen. Project-based learning, so PBL, is a teaching method in which students learn by actively engaging in real-world and personally meaningful projects. So project-based learning is quite a robust and thorough sort of methodology, and there are different standards to follow when you're doing project-based learning. But we can also think about projects in a kind of small, on a sort of smaller scale, as having something that's got, a concrete outcome. But probably when you're working with projects, you're going to have some kind of challenge, maybe a problem or a question, opportunities to reflect and give students their voices and their choices to participate, opportunities to be critical and to revise and think about what you're doing, maybe some inquiry. But yeah, kind of an outcome, a public product, a concrete outcome at the end of it. So I'm curious to know from you, do you use projects? Do you do projects with your young learners? I've got some options for you here. Yes, all the time, sometimes when I can. C, I'd like to, but I don't really know how. D, no, I have to stick to the syllabus. Maybe your syllabus doesn't allow for projects. Some of them might, some of them might not. Or I prefer different approaches. Okay, got A, B coming through. Let's see. Okay. The mixture. Okay. Got some enthusiastic project people here. Somewhere between A and B. A, B, C's. Okay. Scroll down a bit. Oh, great. This is great. So most people have got some experience of doing projects or like to try projects. I think they're a great way. They're great for teachers as well. I think they can make our teaching life, teaching job much easier as well, actually, to follow a project. Okay, sometimes when I can. Yeah, we don't have to be doing projects all the time, for sure. They need to work for us. Okay, so thank you for that. Another question for you. We're thinking about lower secondary examples in this talk today. What do you think are the main challenges teachers face today at lower secondary level? So I'll just give you a minute to think about that and pop it in the chat. What are the main challenges we face today? Yeah, engaging students, lack of interest. Any more? So yeah, keeping student motivation up is a big one, isn't it? Lack of focus and concentration. Yeah. They're not autonomous enough. Yeah, need lots of support. Motivation. Yeah. Lack of interest, attention span is a big one. Yeah, keep those coming. Oh, that was a long one there. Let's have a look at that one. Where did that go? Students not able to sustain learning over more than one session due to neurological differences. Okay. Yeah, that was quite a long comment that's whizzing past. Yeah. Yeah, needing different skills for collaboration. Yeah, Yeah, there's a lot going on, isn't there? I think you're covering quite a lot of the things I've got on my next slide here. I'll just keep them coming. I'm going to pop these up here as well. So, busy lives. So English might be a very small part, or probably is a very small part of their life. They've got a lot going on, more than the 2 or 3 hours of English they might have in their lessons. I don't know. That will vary depending where you're teaching, I'm sure. Low confidence, okay, maybe about English or just in general. Limited exposure to English. They might not be doing very much of it. Maybe you're somewhere where they do get a bit more, which is great. Certainly here in Italy, they don't get a lot of exposure to English at all. Peer pressure, so that feeling of participating and, is it okay to do that? Am I comfortable socially to do that? Mixed abilities, so different learning abilities, learning needs. Short attention is such a big one, isn't it, with the digital world that we live in? The big topic of discussion at the moment. General classroom management, behaviour that we're managing in the classroom. Low motivation, yeah, large classes, I can see someone said there. Anxiety, okay, mixed levels. There's a lot, isn't there? There's a lot going on with our kind of young learners and early teens that we're having to manage and deal with and support them with. More than the learning of English as well. Thank you for that. Okay, so I'm not saying that projects can kind of solve all of those problems, but they can definitely give us a really strong sense of purpose in the classroom. So we're not going to fix all of those problems, but what we can do is help English maybe feel a bit more connected to our learners' lives and give them a bit of motivation to learn it. And I think it's interesting to think about, what is English for right now for them? They live in this really immediate world where everything's kind of happening now and here 1 minute, gone the next. So what is English for right now for our learners? What they're doing every day is engaging with the world around them, their school community, their environment, their friends. A lot of that's online, obviously, nowadays. And I think it can be really impactful when we're connecting English to those things, their lives, their interests, and their values, rather than perhaps to more, traditional textbook scenarios. There are some great textbooks out there now these days as well. But how can we really make those meaningful connections? So it was interesting to hear Christopher Graham earlier in the opening talk this morning, saying that teenagers aren't necessarily passionate about things like sustainability. But I think they are, they're curious and they're aware of these things. Sustainability, environment, questions about fairness. What can I do? What can my friends do? Okay. What are our rights? Talking about these at the right sort of level for them. Emotions, identity. These are things that will make them curious and will get them talking if we, present it and put the right kind of lenses on it to make it accessible for them. And I think if we, respect our young learners' views and opinions about these topics, that's also really motivating. And with the right, input and support, it can get them talking and thinking. So how can we kind of make these topics accessible and these themes accessible? If we've got clear goals for our projects and good scaffolding, then students will feel safer to take risks, which means they'll then participate and collaborate in a better way. So it kind of that shifts the focus away from accuracy maybe to communication. So, for example, in an activity like a pyramid discussion, which we'll see later, it's all about communication. But giving them the scaffolding to do that in a way that they're comfortable with. And we can create little opportunities for small successes, which can really help to build self-belief. So in a way, we can say that having purpose and goals in our projects and with the language that we're using can really support participation and can lead to progress with language and with other skills as well. So part of the reason I'm invited into schools is because I'm a native speaker, which is something that lots of schools in Italy still really value. It's also because I'm qualified and experienced, but I don't really think that's what makes the difference to the kids that I work with. Maybe it's part of the experience, maybe it's part of the novelty to begin with, and it's part of that sort of novel journey, having a native speaker in the classroom. But I really think the value of these projects doesn't come from me speaking to the students, it comes from them speaking to each other. So the teacher is the facilitator, and the structure should give them something to talk about, something they care about, and a reason to listen and respond. I think that's where the learning and the confidence and the genuine participation really happen. Okay, so let's move on to look at some examples of projects. We've seen some really great activities already today. So I'm going to kind of zoom out and give you an overview of three different projects for lower secondary, with a few examples of activities that you can adapt for your classroom context as well. So these little pictures are to remind me. I've got one sort of really solid tick lots of boxes project. I've got another one which was a little bit surprising for me, which is that dog there. And then I've got a sort of quite a simple, straightforward one for you. None of them require particularly, complicated resources or anything, maybe a little bit of digital resources if you have those. But hopefully there'll be something here to inspire you. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the context and what the inspiration was for the project, and then the task and the impact that that had. Okay, so let's start. The first project here is called Refugee Story. So this is my kind of super solid project, which will tick lots of boxes in your classroom. So this was for a grade 8 group, so the last year of middle school in Italy, and they were more or less A2 level. It was a 10 or 15-hour project, depending on the class, and we were looking at human rights and global citizenship. The spark, so the inspiration for this project, was the Olympic refugee team, and the story of Yusra Mardini. I don't know if you know her story, but she was a refugee in the Syrian war, and she was a swimmer. And they made a film about her story called The Swimmers, which tells how she escaped Syria and managed to train and get into the Olympic refugee team. That's a really inspiring story. For language, we were focusing on using the past simple, but also strategies and techniques for creative writing, how to sequence events, using personality adjectives, and talking about empathy and emotions as well. And their task was to research an athlete from the Olympic refugee team and retell their story. So we started off by kind of putting this into the context of human rights. And we did this by making small groups, so twos or threes, and giving them some images. And they had to guess which human rights they think these images represent. So I wonder if anybody wants to have a go at maybe one or two or three of those images. Which international human rights do you think those images represent? Any guesses? Who's going to be first to guess? Mobility, speech, and association. Okay, so the sort of the right to move around, speech, gender equality, freedom of speech, gender equality, freedom of speech. Yeah, that's quite a clear one, isn't it? Freedom of speech. Getting married and moving house, rights of women. Okay, some different ideas. You're covering lots of different human rights here, actually. The right to study. Yeah, the one with the girl in the box is a little bit more tricky maybe than the other two. Freedom of residence. Okay. Testing your knowledge of human rights here as well. I think we've kind of guessed amongst your guesses, we've got all of them, I think. So there's the right to choose who you marry, the right to get married and to choose who you marry. So you can't be forced into marriage under the international human rights law. The right to own your own possessions and freedom of speech. I think we got that one. Well done. So that was just a quite nice kind of inductive way to spark a bit of curiosity and natural participation. We then moved on to do a pyramid discussion I mentioned before. So I don't know if you use pyramid discussions in your classes, but how it works is we use the human rights, and they had to, as individuals, they had to choose three human rights that were most important to them and why. So they start off on their own and make a list of the three human rights and a reason why it's important. And then they go into pairs, and they then have their six human rights, and they compare them, and they say they have to come up with a new list of three human rights between them. So they have to agree or disagree which one's more important and why. So they have to have a discussion about why they're making their choices. Then in the pairs, they've got their new list of three human rights. Then they go into fours and they do the same thing. So they compare and they agree, they disagree, and they justify their reasons, and they make a new list of three. And then the fours go into eights and they do the same thing, make a new list of three. And then the eights go into 16 until we have the whole class having a discussion about which are the three most important human rights as a class. With the right scaffolding and some sentence starters, that really works well. It's a really effective way to get them talking about their opinions about human rights at a level that they can engage with at sort of A2 level. And then we did some empathy exercises. So these kind of emotional connections are so important. So we started to think then about refugees, which is a word, they don't know, they understand maybe what a refugee is, but we accessed it in a kind of empathetic way. So how would you feel if you had to leave your home and you could never go back again? So that really got some discussion going about what you'd miss and, what you maybe what you wouldn't miss. Some people are quite happy about the idea of not being able to go home again, but really, what does that actually really mean if you can't return to your own country and it's not your choice? So we did some empathy about that, and also thinking about, if you have to leave home, you've got 5 minutes, you've got to pack your bag. I'm going to give you your passport, some money, your phone and your phone charger, and then you can choose three other things to put in your bag. What are you going to choose and why? So again, a way to get them to empathize and think about, what it would be like to be in that situation, and get some discussion going at a level in which they can actually contribute to the discussion. And then we moved on to look at the story of Yusra Mardini. So again, we used some images to do this, and they had to, in pairs, they had to just write a simple sentence using the present continuous. What's happening in each of those pictures? If we had a bit more time, we could do this together now as well. But what's happening in those different pictures, and then what order, what sequence do we think the story is going to be? So those aren't in the correct order. So they were able to work on that together. And then as a class, we were able to review those sentences and come up with a version of the story that was in their own words. So they're kind of taking ownership of the story because they're writing it and it's their interpretation of what they understand and what they see. And then we were able to hear a little bit more detail and add some more details into that as well, by listening to the story and watching the trailer too. And then some reflection. So, how does this story make you feel? What do you think about Yusra Mardini? So this is preparing them as well to start their own work, their own project, about their own athletes. And that empathy and human connection are really super important. So then we came to look at their own athletes. So we put them into pairs and we did mixed ability. So some of the stronger students were supporting some of the more fragile students. And they were able to choose a sport, and then they got given the refugee team member that was connected to that sport. And they had a little bit of information about that athlete, to read and to look at vocabulary and to try to understand. And then we used, a bit like Michelle, if you saw Michelle earlier with her mysterious plastic tube, we used no think wonder rather than see think wonder, but we just looked at the text and thought, what do you know? What facts, what information do you have? So helping them to take some notes and get sort of extract the information. What do you think about this athlete? What's your opinion about them? And then what do you wonder? What questions have you got? And then those questions were used to go on and do some independent research about their athlete and try to find some more information. then with that information, we started to build their stories. So we really used, staged instructions and a lot of scaffolding to support them with that because at A2 level, their language production skills still aren't that advanced. So they needed a lot of support. So we thought about, how can you start your story? We talked a lot about what makes a good story. We don't want to have boring stories, do we? So how can we hook our readers? And what kind of language can we use to do that? To get the start of the story, and then using some timing as well. So giving them limited amount of time to write the beginning of their story to keep them focused and keep them on task. And then some language again to help them to kind of build their story and make some connections, add some drama, add some emotions. I think the tendency at that level, if you're talking about another person, is to say that, this is Yusra Mardini. She is from Syria. She is 21 years old. And it can get a little bit sort of repetitive and dull. So trying to get them writing a bit more creatively and adding a bit more kind of sparkle into their work, which makes it more interesting for them as well. And then finishing with a powerful message. So, what does the story of your athlete teach people, and which human rights is it connected to? So, we're kind of looping back and connecting back to the content side of this project as well. So throughout the project, we used peer review to give feedback on the stories, and then also as a sort of final step at the end. So when they'd prepared their digital stories, they had to swap groups and do a kind of final checklist for capital letters, which if you teach young people, they don't really see capital letters anymore. Punctuation, grammar, is that all correct? Is my story interesting? Is our story interesting and engaging and unique? How? So they had to do a little bit of sort of subjective evaluation too. And have we checked pronunciation before going on to record our stories? So that again is really great for participation and giving a little bit of agency to the learners. And also taking the pressure off the teacher. It was great having them doing that check, and then the teacher's check is much quicker and much less of a job. So they finished by, presenting their digital stories with their recorded voices, and I think it was, yeah, as I said, it was a sort of really solid project with lots of boxes being ticked. So they were able, by the end of the project, even in a really simple way, to communicate their ideas about human rights. There was creativity and collaboration in there, responsibility and autonomy. We had one class who were a particularly like studious class. They were very focused, and we had one lesson where they were working in the computer room on their stories, and the teacher and I just said we haven't got anything to do. They're just working on it because they'd had the preparation, which had given them the possibility to be really autonomous with what they were doing. And they had a product at the end that they were really proud of, as well as developing all those digital skills and working with a new digital platform. Okay. So that was the longest project I'm going to share with you. The next one's a little bit shorter. I'm just having a look at the time as well. I think we're okay for time. So the next project is the one that kind of surprised me a bit. So as I said, I get invited to go into schools, and they'll contact me and say, "Oh, we want to do a project about whatever." And this school said, "Right, we've got this class who, they're quite fragile. There's quite a lot of issues in the class, and we're doing a project where we're making an exhibition about Renaissance costumes, and we want to do something in English about the Renaissance and clothes." And I thought, oh, that's not quite my area of expertise. Let's see what we can come up with. What kind of lenses can we put on that to make this accessible and engaging for them? So we thought we focused on, the past simple, vocabulary for clothes, but also fabrics and designs, and describing and explaining choices for this group, which was a grade 7 group, so sort of A1, A2 level. And the task was to design a Renaissance outfit which represents you. So kind of giving that meaningful connection and thinking about their own identities. So we looked at this amazing picture of Queen Elizabeth I and the Spanish Armada, which is just full of symbolism in her clothes. If you look, we looked at the details and did a bit of that sort of see, think, wonder, and looked at the details in her clothes and what they represent. There's a lot of symbolism with the suns and the roses and the pearls. So we looked at what she was wearing in that picture and talked about that. And then we did some work on the fabrics and the details, which they really loved. They were really interested in all these different sort of luxury, opulent fabrics. And we talked a bit about the social context as well. You know, I think with young learners, it's about what kind of perspective can we put on this to make it interesting for them. So talking about, you know, if you were wearing purple silk, but you weren't nobility, you weren't noble, then you could be arrested for that. Which helps them to sort of connect to the sort of social history of it. We used some total physical response and some sort of scaffolding with the words there to describe these clothes. So the clothes were elaborate and fancy and flamboyant, okay, puffy sleeves and large skirts, and played some games with total physical response. And talked about how it was really difficult for the women to move in the big skirts. And then I'm really sorry, but I don't have any pictures of their final works. This was a few years ago now, and I wasn't very good at taking pictures of students' work back then. But I can really remember them, and I can remember how involved they got with, you know, choosing the fabrics and the details for their costumes. So we spent some time thinking about, you know, who are you? What is it that represents you? What do you like doing? And how can you represent that on a costume? So what kind of symbols can you put? What kind of styles can you make that make this outfit represent you? And they had loads of fun kind of choosing and drawing, designing their costumes. And it was a challenging class, but I do think it really helped them, you know, kind of adding this creative layer to something that could be quite sort of dry and heavy. When we're thinking about, you know, the Renaissance period, really helped them to, you know, to work together, to sort of come out of themselves, and to use English in a way that was accessible for them. And we came to, you know, present the work. And one thing we'll see in a minute, but one thing that learners often say at the end of projects that they don't like about projects is that the presentations can be quite boring. So especially when it's an individual thing. So there's a whole class of, I don't know, 24 kids, and they've each got something to present. If they each stand up and present it, it can get quite dull. So we would present in groups, and they'd present and share to each other, and then choose one person to share with the whole class, one that they really liked, to just make that a little bit lighter and a bit more engaging for them as well. So yeah, they really loved their designs, which just really helped them to feel more, you know, confident to explain and justify their choices in English. It's about that sort of agency and that ownership of what they were doing. And actually a really, really simple project. We didn't have lots of materials or resources for it. And it kind of surprised me because at the beginning, as I said, I was a bit like, what are we going to do? And it was actually really, it went really well. Simple is good sometimes. Okay, so the last project I'm going to share is this one. So a healthy day for Pinocchio. This was for grade 6, so the first year of middle school in Italy, an A1 level. Okay, so right at the beginning of their English journey, really, after primary school. And this was a transdisciplinary project, so we had English and science and citizenship and art as well. And the spark was that they were studying the story of Pinocchio in Italian, which is obviously a very famous and important story here. And we decided to focus in on this idea of how can we help Pinocchio be a better boy? So not necessarily healthy food, but just how can he have better, healthier habits? Because he wasn't very well behaved. So we focused on the present simple, adverbs of frequency, healthy and unhealthy habits, and daily routine. So kind of overlapping with what they were doing in English as well. And they had to, you know, invent this healthy day. So, I'm just going to show you a quick video. Sorry, it started playing automatically. I'm just going to show you a quick video of this one. So I'll stop talking for a moment, and this little video should give you an idea of the project. Oh, I think that's finished. It looks like it stopped a little bit before the end, but we got there. Okay, so hopefully that gave you a little bit of an insight into that project. And we were really lucky to have a student teacher as well collaborating with us, and she organised all those big pictures of the characters. But it was a really nice dynamic project. But quite a simple idea really, to create this day for Pinocchio and to have the option to present it as a digital presentation or a storyboard. I think that choice is also really important for agency and motivation and participation. Um, I think one thing about this group is, often in the first year of middle school, they can't really easily produce language yet. They've come from primary school, they haven't had many hours of English, and often they feel like it's not possible. Like that, you get that thing of I don't speak English, I'm not confident with it. But building in the scaffolding and working towards a sort of a final outcome really helps to build understanding and to build their competence and their confidence as well. They realise that they can create and communicate in English. And when you do a project, you've got that really good sort of comparison to how they felt at the beginning and how they felt at the end, and you can reflect on that and talk about that too, so they can see their progress in a really kind of concrete way. Okay, so part of participating is also reflecting on the project and their own personal input. So these are some of the questions that we might ask learners at the end of a project so that they can self-evaluate their own participation and maybe even set some goals for next time. It gives them the chance to reflect on how they got on in the group. Did they contribute? Did they offer creative ideas? Did they solve problems? How many stars can they give themselves? So I think that's a really important part of the process. Again, for giving them that sort of sense of ownership as well and responsibility. And I often do just some really informal evaluation as well about what they liked and what they didn't like, because quite often I'll repeat projects, so it's useful to get that feedback, maybe just with post-its or something really simple. Nearly all the time, the top thing that comes out of what they like is that they really like group work, so they love working with their peers. I think we all know that's really great for confidence and self-esteem and all sorts of things. They, of course, like playing games. And then we said before they didn't like the presentations. Sometimes they can be boring, so finding more dynamic ways to do those, I think, is important in giving roles for the ones who are listening. So can they do some peer review? Can they give some feedback? Writing, any kind of production. So writing and speaking English can be challenging. But at the same time, they also say they like speaking English. So it might be challenging, but they like having the opportunity to do that, which is interesting. So I do think building this kind of evaluation into projects can be really helpful for you as a teacher as well to think about how to develop it and how to make them more participatory. And when I ask teachers, about the impact of these projects on their learners, these are some of the things that they say. So our students became much more confident in their communication skills. Bringing the project to life makes it easier to involve all students, even those who struggle the most. Presenting activities as a means to achieve a final product is a key aspect for student motivation. Now, those of you who do projects, I wonder, do you agree with those things? Do you find that projects build confidence and communication? Do you think they help with motivation and help with inclusion? What do you think? A quick agree or disagree, or an emoji, there's a heart, yeah. Excuse me. Yeah, okay, I've got hearts and thumbs ups coming up. Yeah, definitely. I think it's true. I don't think, projects can also have challenges, of course, and not everything always goes to plan, but the impact can be really powerful. And I think it can make your teaching job a lot easier as well with your planning, because you're creating these journeys, which means you're making your planning a little bit easier, I think. Okay, I think we've just about got time to finish with this quick POW factor mini framework. So how can we really make projects POW, just to sum up? So the P is for purpose, so clear goals and outcomes. Students know what they're doing and and why they're doing it. They have the opportunity to self-evaluate as well. connection to relatable themes and values and experiences, their own interests, using language purposefully, so in context, we're coming back to the language, it's supporting our project outcomes, and continuity, projects that they can really create a great opportunity to connect between different subject areas, but also like little tasters of what's going to come next with language. You might start to use a little bit of the past simple before you're actually studying it. So it's a nice way to introduce and build a bit of continuity. Organisation, so well-planned scaffolding really helps students to, work towards independence. Thank you, 5 minutes left. All right, I'm coming to the end. Thoughtful grouping and roles and can really encourage participation and shared responsibility and autonomy. If we're carefully planning our language, that means we've got opportunities to recycle it and come back to it and keep using it in a purposeful way. And we can collaborate as well, of course. So collaboration between teachers in the schools. So for example, like in the Pinocchio project we saw, and creating those really rich cross-curricular projects. But also, co-planning, co-teaching in your school setting, or maybe having experts coming in from the outside can add a lot of value to projects. And then the W is for wonder, perhaps the most important one. So a project-based approach can create this wonderful opportunity for creativity and imagination, making projects novel and memorable, that sense of curiosity and novelty, and perhaps most importantly, putting learners at the centre, so giving choice, responsibility, autonomy. They're the agents, they're the protagonists, but it's all connected to a purpose, which is all about making learning really meaningful and memorable. So yeah, I'm at the end of my time more or less, but I thought I'd just leave you with a quick sort of thought. What project theme or idea could connect your learners? So maybe there's something you've seen in this talk that you might like to adapt for your own classroom setting. Maybe it's given you some ideas for how you could run projects in your classroom. You don't have to share it in the chat, but just I'll leave you with that thought. So what could you do with projects to really connect your learners? And I would like to say thank you very much for having me. I've got for you, we talked a little bit about peer review here. If you'd like a free download, I've got a free download with 10 catchy ideas for peer review in your classroom for you to try. If you scan that QR code, you'll get that, and you'll also join my newsletter where I share teaching ideas and training opportunities. And you can find out more about what I do on my website there, or come and find me on Instagram or Facebook. Be great to connect with you out here. So thanks very much. I think I've just about done it in time. I don't know if there's any questions, but we might have a minute or two for questions.
Perfectly. Well, thank you very much, Catherine. This was a very interesting session. I am a fan of PBL myself. I enjoyed every single minute of it. I know how important it is and how teachers are sometimes afraid of putting this into practice, and it's just a question of trying.
Yeah, and sometimes just making some little adjustments to what you're doing anyway. Maybe you're doing daily routines, but you can switch that into more of a project-based format, like we saw with the Pinocchio one. Yeah, no, thank you. It's been a real pleasure.